anyone who is a lover of dance, whether it's classical or modern or both, and particularly anyone who loves innovative dance that uses every single inch of the body will know who our guest speaker is tonight. According to his company website, I'm going to quote you now, yes, you take risks, you think big, and you're daring, you explore the unfamiliar, you avoid compromise and tell stories through dance that are compelling and relevant with artistic integrity. Over the next hour, we're going to try to explore some of those themes. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome the fabulous Akram Khan.
Thank you.
Right, Akram, let me start with the difficult one.
Oh.
You take risks. Do you?
Um,
And what sort of risks do you take?
There are different kind of risks, I think. There's physical risks, psychological risks, artistic risks, and I don't claim to take a risk until it's happened, and then realize that was risky. But at the time, it genuinely feels like a new area, and if it's new and unfamiliar, and I'm compromised, if I'm compromised, I feel I'm in a new place.
Okay, so give us an example of where you thought you really were taking a risk, or in retrospect, you felt that you had taken a risk with your dance project.
Well, there's quite a few, but one piece which failed miserably was a wonderful collaboration I had with Juliette Binoche. That was a risk in the sense of I didn't know what the hell we were going to create. She brought her baggage with her, I brought my baggage with me, and we were just trying to find something that is new. And I think in trying to find something that is new, it felt a bit contrived, the risk-taking. But I learned from the failures more than I learned from the ones that work.
So in the process of trying to find this something new with her,
Yeah.
did you feel, I've got to get to the end of this because I need to just push myself, or I've committed myself to this project? Or did you at any time think, oh my God, should I stop?
I thought, should I stop 3 times through the process? So I walked out of it 3 times. I think she walked out of the project 3 times too.
Oh, right.
But not at the same
Sure.
time. It was at different times. But it was an extraordinary experience because we assumed too much, that we could achieve something. And the fact that she was from the film world and I was from the dance world is something new. That already in itself is something new. She's coming with her knowledge, I'm coming with my knowledge. But there was nothing rigorous set to a strategy that was set. So, first of all, we had no strategy. We just turned up in a studio, and then slowly and slowly we decided to make something, and we had never had an outside eye, a proper outside eye, and I felt we should have had another director, perhaps, who directed it. But that was probably the riskiest project I've done.
Okay, well, I'll come back to exploring the new in a little while, but in terms of risk-taking, I suppose to a certain extent, being of Bangladeshi origin, although born here, taking up dance was already a huge risk, wasn't it?
I think for my mother, yes. From the community perspective, because, Bangladesh, I was born in 74, my independence of Bangladesh happened in 71. It was a very horrific time. They lost a lot of family, so they were still very scarred from that. And they moved to London, I think in 73, and I was born in 74. One of the reasons primarily that Bangladesh formed, the root of it originally, was not just economics, it was the language, Bangla, mother tongue. And they fought for that language. But that was one of the many things that they fought for. And so my mother felt, well, how do my children, who are now, my child who's born in London, everything that my family died for or fought for will be lost. So she thought teaching Bengali, just speaking Bengali, isn't, maybe my son wouldn't find that interesting. So let me push him into something culturally a bit more active. And that was dance. So it was weird. I mean, when you look at the photos, because they dressed me up in a sari, I play the women role, I play the man role, and it's quite freakish when you. It's surprised that I didn't turn out to be a drag queen, but literally they put me in many different roles because they thought I was quite natural at it, and that was a way of retaining their heritage, their memory, their yeah.
Well, that's the point. It was a way of retaining their heritage, but how did you feel actually being born in Britain and to all intents and purposes being surrounded by English traditions and English customs? How did you feel being put into this Asian dance environment?
I didn't feel anything at the time when I was very small. But of course, once you become a teenager, even after 7, I started to question, like, because I read comic books. So my superheroes were Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, and they were white superheroes until I saw Michael Jackson. And then everything changed for me. And I thought, here's a superhero, is of a different color and probably closer to me. And somehow he gave me permission, I felt he gave me permission to find my own path away from just Bangladeshi folk dance. And the more I did that, the more I think my father got annoyed. So my biggest conflict was with my father, really.
He couldn't come to terms with the fact that you were absorbing a lot from the West and...
Yeah, and also because they came out of a war, the first thing Chinese people will recognize is this syndrome is our children are going to be the best educated children because that is the way to save them in a way. And so everybody around me, even as kids, they were talking about being doctors at the age of 7, accountants or lawyers, and I couldn't relate to that. So my father, wanted me to go to a private school, and I couldn't even get into a private school. My sister was very, very academic. So, he had these two contrasting things, and then he had a son who wanted to do Michael Jackson rather than Bangladeshi folk dance. So for him, it was like, and he always said, I want you to be a Bangladeshi man. And I have no idea to this day what that means, to be a Bangladeshi man. And so, yeah, I struggled with my father. My mother was a literature expert. So she read to me all my childhood. At night time, she would read stories, or she would tell me stories from Greek mythology to Hindu mythology to Islamic stories to Judaism to Christianity. She just literally flooded me with these stories, and of course, I came out pretty messed up when you're giving so many different stories. Who am I? That didn't help, I would say, but in a way, it did because I became a storyteller from her being a storyteller.
Yeah. Okay. So storytelling. You were trained in Kathak dance, and Katha, I think, means
Kathak.
Story,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
So the traveling
Tell
bands
stories.
who used to spread this or perform these dances around Bangladesh would...
India.
India,
Yeah.
indeed, because it's Hindu, would then tell stories, all the great epics.
Mahabharata, Ramayana, yeah.
Right. So when you actually perform those,
Yeah.
to what extent do you feel this is me, a Bangladeshi, in terms of my parents being Bangladeshis, and I'm expressing that part of my culture, or are you interpreting something?
I have a daughter who's 5 and a son who's 3, and my son is very similar to me. I understand myself now because of my son, because he's got no brains, he's just literally physical. So for him to probably understand things, he'll probably be 18 and he'll go, oh, now I think I understand. I never thought of what I was doing so long as I was moving. So I never had those conflicts. I had conflicts, but I didn't know how to put it into words. I wasn't a person who could conceptualize or understand the frustration that I knew I had a frustration, but dance was the therapy. So as long as I danced, all that frustration went out the window. And that was my way of getting through my teenager, with my father putting pressure on me, intense pressure, feeling like I'm a failure most of my childhood, my father. My mother saying, anything is possible. Just find yourself when you're ready. So two contrasting views. Me studying Indian classical dance, going to do work with Peter Brook at 13 on the Mahabharata. My Islamic community got very upset by that. My mum, she's a feminist, so she really defended anything that is, she feels is unfair or unbalanced, and she defended me going there because she said it would change my thinking. So I, in a way, owe a lot to my mother because she was really a supporter, but she was the one who was kind of placing me in certain situations to help me get through. It wasn't me thinking, I didn't quite understand the frustration until I became a choreographer. And suddenly I had to speak to people. You can't not do interviews. So it was the first time my voice was heard, if you like. Until then, my body was my voice.
But it's interesting that your mother pushed you into dance
Yeah.
rather than you discovering dance for yourself. And yet you are an absolute master of it. So is that a genetic thing? Have you actually inherited it from your mother or some other member of the family? Or is it something that has been, they talk about nurture and nature and all of that. How much of...
To be honest with you, in the West, Western perception of narrative, I always say that Western perception of narrative is there's good and there's evil. There's bad and there's good, there's black and there's white. It's as simple as that. That's where we start. That's all narratives in the West. In Asian narratives, the good has bad, the bad has good. It's far more complex than that. The good cannot be completely good. And it reflects, the Asian thinking of narratives reflects more to me because I'm interested in human complexity, what it means to be human. And I feel Asian narratives deal, like Mahabharata, really deals with that. It's about families. So now using that point on my parents, my mother encouraged me or pushed me to dance, but it wouldn't have been possible to arrive where I am today without my father pushing against it.
That's interesting.
Because I had something to prove. He said I would never make it. And so that drove me. I mean, it's very funny, he's great, because now on TV when we're doing interviews, he's like, yes, I did that purposely. I had planned it, I knew it,
Well, he does deserve some credit. But you used the word complexity a couple of times.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we talk about Kathak dance, it is a highly complex dance. It has a lot of motifs, a lot of patterns, and unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to see Akram actually demonstrating the dance steps, but I would like you to just tell us about the sort of patterns that you come up with as you're dancing. It seems to be a very fluid thing that's always evolving.
Yeah, I mean, Indian classical dance takes a lot, of course, from Indian music. We base everything on Indian music. And rhythms, mathematics is highly complex. And I'm literally a beginner compared to my musicians who are masters at it, especially Manjunath, who's the mridangam player, who's like a master to me. And if I'm amongst you, then I'm a genius. But when I'm amongst him, I'm nothing. So, it depends where you place me, with who you place me with. But I've studied rhythms, the complexity of rhythms. We have things like, 4 beats, 6 beats, 3 beats. But we have, in Indian music, we have 5 1/4, 6 1/2, 7 3/4.
And very often in the same piece, you will have this mixture.
Yeah, I like to mess around with the dancers that I work with, so I give them really complex stuff, so they struggle with it, so I don't struggle with it. it's
Well,
an
could you
ego
give us
thing.
a verbal, an oral demonstration of
Yeah.
these?
So, for example, if we have a pattern of 8, so you have patterns of 8 in duets, for example, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That leads up to 8. Then you have a trio, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have a 7, 8 left. Then you have a quartet, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we have a phrase. I love this moment because people start glazing over. And then you have a phrase called a tihai. So tihai means a phrase repeated 3 times with equidistant gap. So the tihai would be, for example, Akram, Akram, Akram. If I said Akram, gap, gap, Akram, that's not a tihai. The gaps have to be equidistant. So a tihai would be, if it's an 8, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, da. So you have a pairs, you have trios, you have quartets, and then you have a tihai. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. At the high, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, da. So this is just a pattern, but the complexity lies now in if we have the clock. What is the starting point of clock? It's 0, right, or 12. In Indian music, it's 1. Everything begins on 1, but everything also ends in 1. So when you, it's like the Hindu philosophy, if you like. So also Buddhism, it's cyclical. Life and death are cyclical. So we start on 1 and we finish on 1. If it finishes on 12, then the cycle hasn't ended for it to begin again. So the ending is the beginning is the ending. So if I had, for example, oh, I don't have it. Oh, here we are, metronome. So if I had a cycle of 16 beats, which is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can you count it? 9, 10, 11, 12, 13,
14, 15, 16,
1. Okay, stop. So basically, for it to make sense mathematically, whatever phrase I do, it has to finish on 1. Yeah, so if you say 1 really loudly, yeah? 2, 3, just stick with this. Let's slow it down a bit, sorry. 12, 13, 14, 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So all the patterns I'm going to say, 13, 15, has to equate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Right.
So you can reverse it. Because what you put in, yeah, so long as you don't take anything out, it will mathematically always be right. So if I reversed it with the tihais first, then the quartets, then the trios, and then the duets, it'll be the same. 13, 14, 15, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You'll finish on 1. So
I should finish on 1.
Yeah.
My legs would be all over the place.
But that's probably the most simplest exercise that we're taught. That's the first thing we're taught. So, no, it gets really complex to the point where we are counting in the hundreds. We're calculating stuff at, not me, my musicians are calculating stuff at split of the second. So I would throw a pattern, for example, within that pattern. Syllables are numbers, basically. So, so he'll figure it out and he'll go, okay, this is how many calculation it is. So I need to make some tihai out of it, and he'll make a tihai and he'll just magically work it out and it will finish on 1. While I'm doing it, while I propose, even if I haven't ever said it to him. So some musicians can do that. Obviously we can't. I can't do that. But yeah, it's very complex. And I was hugely inspired by Stravinsky. Well, because I remember listening to Rite of Spring and I said, fuck, this is really insistent. It didn't sound Western. the mathematics of it doesn't sound Western. And actually, to be honest with you, Stravinsky's taken a lot from gypsies. When he lived in St. Petersburg, that square, there were lots of he could memorize things that he would just listen to while he was walking through the street as a little boy. So he would come home and then he would be able to play and translate what he had heard and then make a composition out of it, even as a child. And so Rite of Spring, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. These are not Western mathematics, Western counts, patterns. So Stravinsky really drew a lot from his background of what he was experiencing as a child. So I could really relate to that. And one thing that he always said was, that struck me was, at a time when he was creating music, it was a very special time, you know, a lot of great artists in Paris, you know, making amazing work in that period. But he didn't want music, he didn't want to create sadness by playing something sad and melancholic. He wanted to evoke something that reflected sadness out of patterns. And so Rite of Spring was about danger, about sacrifice. And so he used patterns to evoke emotion. And I've always found that fascinating in my own work as well.
So that is the Kathak side of things, of your training. But then at the same time, you get more and more...
That is my side of what I think that
okay,
is,
all right.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you're getting inspired by people like Michael Jackson.
Charlie Chaplin, Fred Astaire,
right,
Buster
okay.
Keaton.
Mm-hmm. These are all very intrinsically Western people, although very innovative in their own way.
Yeah.
So how do you then bring these two elements together?
There was nothing to bring together. It's funny because I never saw Charlie Chaplin. Some artists are so universal that they transcend color or culture. I found Bruce Lee to be that. I found Muhammad Ali to be that, philosophically, and I found Charlie Chaplin to be that. I stopped seeing him as a color, that he was British or French or wherever he was from. He was, for me, an artist. And that's the power of the body. It's probably the least racist of all the art forms is dance. Still today, when we look for dancers, we look for skills. We don't, in film or theater, you're looking for, depending on who writes, what they write, which characters. You know, I want a white person with a African-American person, you know, playing a certain character. But for us, it's whether you can dance or not. The body is the most ambiguous and fluid art form, I find.
So would you say that it was relatively smooth running for you to actually proceed, you know, and to progress in your career? Given
no, it wasn't easy. I don't think. I was still fighting my community for a long time, because just recently I did a show called Xenos at Sadler's, and one of my aunties came up to me, and you know she changed my nappies and everything. So she came up to me. She said, "Ah, Baba, that was wonderful. I'm so proud of you. So what is your daytime job? Tell me." After performing for an hour and 5 minutes, standing away, or whatever, just for her to say something like that. But she wasn't being disrespectful. She was genuinely concerned about my future. So, you know, for her, this was a hobby. So I've never kind of they're very proud of me now. But that tension has always been there. So I remember they said, look, he has to go to university. And my mum said I should go to university because at a certain point she felt like, what if it doesn't work out for him? Which is fair enough. I understand the concerns. So at least get a degree, even if it's in dance. And so I went for a dance degree.
Right, so you go off to De Montfort.
Yeah. To
Leicester, which has a very large Asian community, doesn't it?
Yeah. But it was the only university that accepted me. No, seriously. No, because I didn't have the qualifications. But in all hindsight, I owe it to my teachers because they just sidetracked the qualifications that I needed. They cheated. They said, they saw me dance and they said, he needs to do this course to get his qualifications. And they found a way. They didn't cheat, but they found a way, you know, like some tax people do. They just found a system that allowed me legally to go into De Montfort University, and they defended it.
Good
and
for them.
I was lucky. They were very. they were
But
great.
so you get to De Montfort,
Yeah.
and that's where you start exploring Western contemporary dance.
Yeah.
You discover
Pina
Deviate
Bausch,
and
Deviate,
Pina Bausch,
yeah.
yes. And what was it about Deviate and these new dances and contemporary dance that really appealed to you, and in which you saw something really different and worth pursuing?
It didn't appeal to me at all. I was completely horrified and disgusted by watching Deviate, because it was just everything that I was not taught. You know, classical generally has a way of protecting itself in a bubble, and it doesn't always relate to human people. It relates to the gods. As a classical Indian dancer, you're training to please the gods, not to please human beings. And so when I saw Deviate, of course, for someone who is a virgin in contemporary dance, when I saw Deviate, it was like a shocking initiation. You know, they were talking about gay people. There was a whole piece about gay men. And I was completely horrified. I was thinking, what will my mum say? You know, all this. So in many ways, that culture kind of, you know, shaped my thinking. But what it did do, after getting over the shock, was I got angry. And I got angry because I said, why have I not seen this? And I had a million questions for the first time, because I never questioned my guru. You don't question your master. Not the way I was brought up. Anyway, with my relationship with my guru. So, and the teachers said, what do you think from watching what you saw? And I was shocked that they asked me that my opinion mattered. And so instead of answering what I thought, I started asking them a million questions. And so this was initiated, was unlocked. And so I owe that to De Montfort. I questioned everything. I questioned the classical form. Until that point, I just served my guru. I just did what I had to do. And there's something very beautiful about that too. I'm not saying it's bad, but definitely I remember seeing Deviate and being shocked. Yeah.
So is that the start point of when you start, when you bring issues into your dance?
No, much later.
Much later?
Much later. I would say when I consciously brought issues into dance was after my children were born, because they reflect the future. And I started thinking about, because you know, we're in our own bubble, all of us. But the bubble now is much bigger. You cannot choose to ignore climate change. You cannot choose to ignore the politics of the world. You cannot. If you have children, you cannot. You can die off in the next few years, and you may be all right, but your children will not. And so, and we fucked it up for them. Our generation and my parents' generation have damaged the world. We are the first generation to know that, that we are destroying our planet, and we are the last generation that can do anything about it. That statement in itself is terrifying. But we are on an economic, you know, the way the world is set up with the monetary system, and it's just we're stuck. We're literally our eyes are white. You know, it's washed into this way of thinking, and we're terrified of resisting it. And some people are, but you know. It's terrifying, and so I wanted to use my art, or the art, to explore those themes. Not that it will make a difference, because in the end the politicians make the biggest difference, but in some ways it does, in small ways. But even if it's in small ways, that's my way of rebelling, if you like.
Right, so you're looking at current themes, current topics that concern people. Of course, one of the most recent themes that everyone has been talking about and really have not been able to ignore is, of course, the centenary of World War I. And you took part in the Lest We Forget production. What do you feel that you brought into it that was so different from the others who were involved?
Lest we forget, I didn't bring anything that was so different, except that I focused on women. But so did the other choreographers and artists. I think Xenos is the one, my solo piece, which is about Indian colonial soldiers, 1.4 million Indian colonial soldiers and 4 million colonial soldiers worldwide that fought for the British Empire and were slowly, not slowly, clearly edited out of history books. So I never studied that. And I just felt, well, you know, they fought for Britain. They died for Britain. Why are they not at least acknowledged in some way? And that really upset me. And all I had written was, I never knew up to the, up to last year. And actually, it was a few weeks ago where the royalty and the government finally acknowledged the colonial soldiers officially, 100 years later. And it's incredible because, whether it's the film, is it called Dunkirk? So where are the women? I mean, it's most of art is predominantly in the West seen from a white man perspective, not even from a white female perspective. It's shown through a white male perspective. We have to change now, and things are slowly changing. I hope it damages the system enough so it can never return back, because we have a habit of returning back. Somehow it gets imbalanced by the unfairness, but it comes back to the same power struggle and setup as it was before. Like we're living, Xenos is also, I made it because we are 5 years before the First World War, 10 years, say 5 years, and 5 years before the Second World War. We are experiencing the exact same symptoms today as what happened 5 years before the First World War and 5 years before the Second World War. That is terrifying. And the root of it is xenophobia. And the governments making sure people hate each other, let there be division, and out of that comes their agenda. And I don't think young people want that.
So by deliberately considering those very awkward questions, is that what you mean by being bold and daring? That you just push the boundaries, you do whatever you want, you express whatever concerns you personally?
Yeah, and I don't think of those words. I think my company thinks of those words, of bold and daring. For me, it's not about that. I think the daring people really are the ones who speak out on Me Too. Those are the daring ones. For me, I'm still in my art. I'm still doing it through my art, in a safety through my art. But I feel that, yes, I have a responsibility to my children, that at least they know that I always thought politics was separate from art. I always tried to be separate. At least consciously, I said to myself, if you see my early interviews, they're all saying, no, I don't deal with politics. It has no role. But actually, every step, every movement one makes, every choice one makes, whether you agree with something or choose to be silent, even being silent is a political statement. You've made a choice. I didn't realize that every fiber of us, every action we take is political. So I was just in denial for the first 15 years of my career until my children were born.
That's interesting. Okay, so, but you are definitely exploring different things. Now, you mentioned just before your collaboration with Juliette Binoche, so you have an actress there. You've collaborated with Sylvie Guillem, but of course that's to be expected. Anish Kapoor and Kylie Minogue. Explain how all of that happened, and how did you feel?
I love the way you put Anish Kapoor and Kylie Minogue in the same sentence. Anish Kapoor, there's a very dear friend of mine called Angela Bernstein, and she, not many people know her except artists, really. Somehow she's the underground connector to a lot of people, artists that we see today. Those collaborations, she just has an ability to connect people and think of certain ideas that would be good. And she knew Anish Kapoor, and my producer Farooq and I were huge fans of Anish Kapoor. And she said, "I'll set up a meeting." And this is the beginning of my career. And then I met Anish Kapoor, and I was given a brief by my company of what to say to him. And so I met him, and he's like a godfather of visual arts, and I was kind of nervous, and he said, "So, what do we do, Akram? What do you want to do?" And at that time, now if you ask me, I have a lot of things to say, but at the time, I was thinking in my head, like, whatever you do is good enough. But I didn't say that. Instead, out of fear, I started giving the remit that my company had given me, which is, it has to fit into two bags that I'm going to carry. So the set has to fit in two bags that I'm going to carry. And he thought the audacity of this young man. I'm Anish Kapoor, and you're telling me, before we've even discussed the idea, that there's such a limitation, what can I make that fits into two bags, And his work is of a scale. But I remember speaking, and then it turned into a whisper, and through the sentence, and then he was just like, "Are you saying anything?" So it didn't go great, that first encounter. And then the next time we came together, he proposed an idea, because I had mentioned Shiva, the god Shiva from Hindu mythology, and I was interested in creation, preservation, the concept of creation, preservation, and destruction. And so he came up with this idea, and then I got excited by it. I bullshitted a lot of the way through those early collaborations. Like, yes, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I was just thinking that, and I had no clue. I was literally I was just agreeing with if he's saying it's a good idea, it must be a good idea. So I don't know if that's a real collaboration on equal terms, but that was the truth. I was a complete novice, and but what was really beautiful was to see Anish in his studio when the set was there. He was like a little, in front of you guys, he'd be so sophisticated, and he speaks so well, and he talks like this, and he's really articulate, and a genius, and in the studio, he's like a fucking kid. So he was like my child, my 4-year-old boy. He was smelling the cloth, he was looking at the cloth, to the point where he forgot that he was not the choreographer, and he started saying, "What if you did this move and that move against it? And what if, you know what, turn the lights on, try it on me." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not sure I want to see you. I don't think you're the right person." But I couldn't say that to him, of course. But it was the moment I realized that what these great artists have is that they never lose their child curiosity and their sense of child imagination. And so what I became fascinated by was the child body in us. I love watching children because they're the most, they're not groomed yet into society, so they're kind of wild, and in that wildness, anything is possible. And that limitless possibility, that creative, is that part of the growth is where I try to focus on.
But it's interesting that you say that here you have Anish Kapoor, who is
A
really
giant,
internationally acclaimed, and yet when he steps onto stage, he becomes like a child.
No, in a studio.
In the studio.
In privacy.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So it's all new to him,
Yeah.
and suddenly he's dwarfed by all of these new things. In reverse, when you are put into an unfamiliar environment, do you feel, "I know nothing," and then you are gradually learning, gradually absorbing?
Yeah, I've got a default now over a certain time, period of collaborating. My default is I always say to everyone from the beginning, "I don't know anything about this," and they all wonder. All these big collaborators wonder, "Well, he invited us to this project, and he should have done his homework." And I say, "I just have one seed, and I put it here." So my next production is Outwitting the Devil. That's the title of my next show. And we're going to start creating next year. We've been discussing it for a while. And my starting point is just a seed, which Peter Brook would call a formless hunch, or a smell, or a color. My work evolves from dialogue. It always has. I can't be like a writer. I've never been able to come up with something and say, ta-da, here it is. But through dialogue, through exchange, through collaboration, I've been able to come up with things. It's the only way I operate well. And so the starting point of Outwitting the Devil to all the collaborators was the Last Supper. So I started with the image, the iconic image of the Last Supper, because I'm interested in the ritual of eating together. And I was interested particularly because my art teacher, when I was a student, said to me, this is the most iconic image ever. And I remember looking at it going, oh, that doesn't reflect my street. Because in my street, there was this Nigerian family, there was an American family on the other side, a French family, a Chinese family, and Merton Park, Wimbledon, that area was just full of diversity in a sense. And so I was in awe of the Last Supper, but I couldn't relate to it directly until a woman called, what was her name? Celine? Dorothy White? Yeah. So she's an Australian artist who came up with this image called the First Supper. And I think it was in the 80s. And anyway, so I remember getting a glimpse of that and going, from the classical one, you've just completely changed this. So you can use the classical one as an inspiration, but have your own interpretation. And the First Supper was all women. And the one in Jesus' place was an Aborigine. I mean, she was very political. She's an white Australian woman. And the one in Judas's place was a white woman with a Coke can. So she was really making a statement. But all of the women were from different nationalities. And so I felt for the first time, oh, this reflects my street. So I wanted to re-look at the idea of ritual of eating because when I'm eating with my children now, somehow my children are in another place. They are in the world of iPad. So technology has changed the way we interact with each other, even as a family. Of course, you can push up to a certain point. You can hide the iPad, and it finds its way back to the table. Even to the point where I carry my phone everywhere with me. It's tragic. And so I wanted to look back and reflect now on that iconic image of the Last Supper and talk about what does it mean to eat together, who gets to sit at the table, and talk about food, what are the resources, who has the power over resource, simple things like water and bread. So it's very political, of course, but all I said to the collaborators was the Last Supper. That's all I said. And so most of the collaboration, I don't, every early meeting, I don't really have much, just that I want to do something about the Last Supper, and then somebody will say something, and somebody else will react to that, and somebody will argue with that, and suddenly the work is forming.
Okay, right, let me throw this open now to all of you. I'm sure you have lots of burning questions. Okay, could we please keep the questions short and to the point, please? Thank you, over there.
Hi Akram, my name is Tak, and it's my honor to be here. I love Sinos, I love your shows, and the real power of it that digs into an inheritance, not only a spiritual inheritance, but also a cultural inheritance, and this bestow of this power in order to make art. And as I was watching the show, what really stand out to me was this saying by Maya Angelou, which she said, "I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And perhaps 1.4 million soldiers were standing with you. But my question comes through the inheritance. And as we heard from your aunt, perhaps it's not from the means of their expression, but do you feel that there's a inheritance to the art that you create and the story that you bring to the world? Thank you.
It's a very interesting question. Inheritance. You mean from my parents? Yeah, I think I feel no responsibility to the inheritance, but it's a part of me, whether I like it or not. You know, I'm a curry house kid. I've just recently made a documentary on Channel 4 about curry house kids, because Brick Lane is changing. Every year I make a documentary with Channel 4. So last year, you know, Grayson Perry, so he's really brilliant at it. And so the same production company asked me to do it. And so it was interesting to go back to my inheritance, in the sense of my parents' culture and my upbringing. It's always in my work.
Is that what Desh is
Yes,
also
but Desh is
about?
directly. Yeah, that's really about my father. I don't know if you saw that one, but it's really about my father. And to the point where my mother saw the show and said, "Really? Do you really want everyone to know about this?" And I said, "Ma, you are dying for Dad to die. And here you're defending him. You know, you fight all the time with him, protecting me." And it was amazing. When it's you know, Bangladeshi people have this amazing ability of this thing called izzat, which means your reputation, your pride. So even if things are going completely wrong, we will always say it's going great to the public. And I only discovered that doing the Curry House Kids in Brick Lane. So Desh is very much, I kind of broke through that izzat and said, no, I want to reveal my experience, because that is my inheritance. You know, my father being the way he is because his father was in a particular way. And his father was like that. My mother, being a literature expert who wanted me to learn about stories, was because she was a woman who the whole of Bangladesh thought was a failure. Because in the sense of, her father was a 2 times gold, my grandfather was a 2 times gold medalist of mathematics. And they're still studying his theories. And so when she was born, everybody assumed she would be a failure. She hasn't got it. She's not a mathematician. So she said, fuck it, I'm going to go and study literature then. And I'll do it my way. She wasn't good at maths anyway. But that's not the point. The point that, and that's how she got into feminism. And then when I was born, the entire community, Bangladeshi community, said, this is God. He must be a mathematical genius. And I haven't even done 2 + 2. I was a baby. So for the first 17 years of my life, I was treated like royalty because I was my grandfather's grandson. I was the grandson of this genius mathematician. And then in A-level, I got a U, which means unclassified.
Well, that's quite a record.
And and the community thought, the examiners must have got it wrong, you should go and do it again. So for them, I did it again, and I got a U. And when the 3rd time I got a U, I just said to the community, I'm so sorry to disappoint you. I just don't think I'm cut out for mathematics. So that's all played a part in my upbringing. And the reason I dance today is because perhaps they thought I was a genius. Because you start to believe you are if people around you tell you you are. And so by default, I became fascinated by movement patterns. So I was not good at mathematics, but I studied human patterns and animal patterns. And by that, I studied rhythms and complexities of bird movements, moving in flocks. And just because I thought I was a genius, even though I was not at all a genius at all, I was not even good at maths, but by default, that shaped, I just ended up fascinated by patterns.
I suppose to a certain extent, all dancers experiment with movement of different parts of their body. But what's so innovative about Desh, I think, is that you also use your head. I mean, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
And you actually use your head and make the head speak to your audience.
Yeah, my father, that was my father,
Yes.
yeah.
Very
No,
clever.
it was, I can't claim that I came up with that. It was by default because my general manager at the time, Bia, I wanted to work with puppets, and she said, no more puppets, everybody's using puppets. And I will always find a way to get my way. But what it forces me to do is to find a way that nobody's ever done it before, where I use puppets, but I'm not using puppets. And then a friend of mine, Damien Jallet, very good choreographer himself, said, this bone here looks like a nose. It sticks out like a nose. And I said, oh, it's amazing because one of the political characters that I want to play, he painted on his body. So why don't I put two eyes here and a mouth? And suddenly he said, oh, that's a face. And so I started doing all sorts of, the whole thing. And it suddenly, I could kind of, find that tax avoidance way with Bia, who said, you can't invest getting puppet people to have a puppet on stage because I became the puppet. So there was no expense. So by default, things came about. And I try to use limitations are my greatest strengths as an artist. The more you limit me, the more creative I'm going to be.
Okay, another question. Yes, at the back.
Yeah, hello. My name is Julie. Yes, you mentioned about the flocks of birds, and just like to say, some of us, although they're not here, we took part in the big dance that you created a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember all those sort of bird movements that we had to do, and also the Olympics opening ceremony. I do remember that, and that was a very evocative piece. I was going to ask, do you, to find other inspiration, do you enjoy travelling to other countries and see how their styles of dance can perhaps influence your shows or give you ideas?
In all honesty, I hate traveling. Because, at one point, when people ask you, where do you live? A friend of mine, someone I just met recently said, I live on planes. And I was living on planes for too long. So I don't like traveling because when I travel, I'm working. And that's the really sad bit. But I love meeting people, dancers. And so that's the only joy I get is meeting those dancers. Like when I went to Shanghai 2 weeks ago, the first thing I said was, I want to give a masterclass. And they're like, but your rules are that you don't give masterclass. You only come and do the show. And I said, no, I want to know the stories of how the creative people are operating in China and how they're expressing themselves and what are the stories that they have to say. And Shanghai, they've built this amazing complex for dance, and it's just really inspiring. So I spend time with dancers and visual artists and writers and filmmakers. I always try to connect. My big thing, but we've got YouTube. So in one way it's terrible, but on the other hand, you can just draw so much from YouTube, and then you go to that place. So I was interested in Japanese fishing dance that every child learns at school. And then we went to Japan and saw Yuko's friends show me some of that form and teach us some of that form, which then went into Until the Lions, which is a group piece that we're actually presenting at the Roundhouse again in January. So I draw a lot from, I have to say, YouTube, because I try not to travel so much, on the other hand, because I have children. And I'm a bit tired of not being a father. And it's such a, at this stage they want you. They really do. They want you. And I know from 8, I didn't want my father and mother. So I feel I'm going to lose that possibility because I'm being so much of an artist. I want to balance that more.
Now, in that question, the London Olympics was raised. When you were approached to do that, what was your initial reaction?
Well, Danny Boyle came over and asked me that, can you keep a secret? And if he knew a Bengali, which he didn't, obviously, it's very hard for me to keep a secret.
Mum, Danny Boyle's asked me to do the Olympics.
Yeah, and that's okay. It only goes as far as my mum, but my mum then goes as far as the entire community. That's the problem. And then my father tells the whole street, and the whole of Wimbledon. Every person he's walking by past. And so Danny just said he saw Vertical Road, And he said, I would love you to do something of that nature. And the single word that I give you is mortality. Remind us of our mortality. And then with Danny and with the composer, we came up with the idea of Emily Sander, who Danny chose, and the hymn, the idea of the hymn. And I wanted no strings, nothing, just the raw voice and the hymn. And it was, I wanted to kind of, through Danny, I wanted to express something spiritual, perhaps. I think that's the thing that is lacking in our lives today. Everything is quantifiable. If it's not quantifiable, we are frustrated. Art cannot be quantified. Life and death cannot be quantified. It's things we don't understand. And what we don't understand, we say are not worth investing in. And so for me, he wanted to remind the gladiators, who were the athletes, that we come from the earth, and we will also, no matter if you're a gladiator, you will also go back to the earth. And I thought that was very poetic of Danny's thinking, and it lent itself to my way of thinking anyway. So.
But in terms of space and physicality, did you feel challenged by the fact that normally you're talking to a closed audience in a theatre? Here, you're working on a huge stadium. Did that challenge you in any way? It's no more... it's difficult for me to actually verbalize this, but I suppose when you're in a theatre, you're doing something with purpose, and the people who have come to watch you are watching with a specific purpose.
There's a contract, yeah. They paid a ticket,
That's
there is
right,
a...
exactly. This, the London Olympics, becomes a spectacle, which is different. I mean, did you feel challenged in any way by that?
Completely, yeah. I was so confident until I got to the stadium and did a rehearsal. And then I turned around to Danny and said, there's 50 of us. And I was watching the rehearsal, somebody was playing my role, and I said, I can't even see them. We're like ants. And I said, I need to go back. I need to go back to the studio, and I need to rework the whole thing. So we reformatted the whole thing once we had done a open-air rehearsal in the daylight, in the stadium. And that's the first time I smelt and started to have a curiosity for scale. And now all I want to do is huge scale project. Because the possibilities of hundreds of dancers, I mean, yeah, it's quite exciting. But at the time I was terrified because, you get it wrong, 1 point however many billion people will remember you got it wrong. You get it right, well, they won't talk about it, but they would have seen it.
Yeah, okay. Any more questions? Yes, on the front row here.
On Sunday, I went to the Dawa Festival and saw the second night, and it was amazing.
Thank you.
You came on at the end, and you said that you had seen the Odissi dancing, and you thought, I should have gone for that. And I just wondered if that is something which is going to go into your future dancing, if that's something which what is the thing that you've seen recently that you think, oh, wow, if I knew about that when I was 7 and my mum would let me, I'd have gone in, I would love to have tried that.
I wish I had studied ballet. When I saw Nureyev and Baryshnikov, I don't know, I always wanted to be a ballet dancer. And I can't point my feet, so I never would have made it. But that for sure, and singing. My ex-wife was South African. So I had a huge connection to South African culture and music. And a lot of my colleagues are artists who were close friends of mine, like Gregory Makoma and so many others, Vincent Mansouri. I grew up watching, and the music from there, I was initiated into that culture. And so I wish when I heard that, I wish I was always a singer. But I went into singing. Before you learn Indian classical dance, you have to learn music for 2 years. Well, that's what my Guruji made us do. So he said, before you step into dance class, you go and learn music, and you go and learn percussion. So the classes were opposite each other. So I went into my singing class, and my singing teacher says, "Okay, sing sa." So I went sa, and he said, "Okay, get out." And that was the only class I ever did of singing. And so I went to the percussion class, and he said, "Okay, play this," and I was able to place it. You stay. So that was the end of, and beginning and end of my singing career in that class. But I just love that people can move people with their voices. It's just, I mean, to be honest with you, dance is the hardest art form. I'm not saying I've tried singing, but I've done theatre, and dance is the hardest art form. Because you have to train every day. I mean, like singers, actually. Not like actors. Actors, you wait for your next job. It's difficult to keep training in acting unless you're in a room full of people. But as a dancer, between 6 and 9 every morning, for 3 hours, before my life continues with rehearsals and children, blah, 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 I train in my studio, in the backyard. And it's your entire body that you have to, it's hard. It's a hard art form. So I wish I wanted to be a tabla player, actually, also, because I was learning tabla. And there was a point in my, when I was about 17, my Guruji said, "Okay, step up. Do you want to take this seriously, dance?" And I just wanted to say, I was just thinking to myself, you know, playing tabla, I can just sit down. And I can train for hours, not sweat, have a drink, and just keep playing. But if I get up, you're going against gravity. You know, as a tabla player, you're not going against gravity. Standing, you have to move. So, but I was so terrified to tell my teacher that I want to be a tabla player that I just said, "Okay, I'll take dance." And then that's how I ended up in dance, I think.
Okay, one last question, maybe. Or, well, perhaps I can ask the last question. You've come across many cultures, obviously your own Bangladeshi culture, British culture, whatever British culture is, South African, Japanese now, and also amongst your travels you have visited different countries and come across different cultures. All of this, to a certain extent, I suppose you're taking in some of what you see. And I noticed that in the past you've actually talked about not a fusion of these cultures, but a confusion of cultures. What do you mean by that?
I was talking more about confusion of the body, because, you know, I grew up above my dad's restaurant, and my father, at the time in the 80s, was blaring out Bollywood films from his VHS copy, VHS cassettes, and my mother used to work at Decca Records, so whenever some record was scratched, she would be given the record. Well, that's what she told us, anyway. And she'd come back with that record. And so she was playing Tom Jones. So I grew up with Lata Mangeshkar, Muhammad Rafi versus Tom Jones. And my sister and I had a radio where we would try and find Michael Jackson in the middle. So at a certain point, it starts to feel, the chaos starts to feel, you start to find a balance. But it finds it without the mind finding it. So the body, when people used to call it fusion, that it's a fusion of Kathak contemporary, you can't fuse them really. Kathak is Kathak, contemporary is contemporary, ballet is ballet. And fusion is too simplistic because people need to box things in and say, well, that's what it is. If they can't identify it, they freak out. So I always said that my body is in the flux of confusion because it copied Michael Jackson as a child. I was imitating Fred Astaire, Bruce Lee, all these people. And so when I do Kathak, it has Michael Jackson in it. It will have Charlie Chaplin in it. And so I can't take one out of the other. They are. It's a flux of. So I felt fusion was too simplistic, in a way. They just wanted to label what I do, and you know, we are constantly in a state of confusion, every one of us, because we are continuously changing. If you look at a painting, and you take it in a certain way, And where it is in the venue, fine. You leave the museum, you come back a year later, you look at the painting, and you feel something's changed. But the thing is, the painting hasn't changed, you have changed. You're changing every day. So for me, it's a constant transformation. We're constantly transforming. So I felt fusion was too much, making it like it was to box it in and feel like, okay, this goes in a museum now. This is fixed. Nothing is fixed. That's the one thing that is definite.
May you always remain confused and bring us many, many more exciting productions. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank
please.
you.
Thank you very much.